Welcome to The Real Market with Chris Rising, the only podcast that brings the real estate conference panel to your headphones. You'll hear from superstars from every realm of commercial real estate, the biggest brokers, the most well-known architects, the largest investors, and the most visionary developers. We'll learn what they do, how they do it, and what drives their success. We'll discuss the latest trends across regional markets, capital flows, both national and global, and we'll explore technology's role in shaping all of them. We'll take a clear-eyed look at where we've been, where we are now, and what's to come. Real conversations, real experts, real insights. This is The Real Market.
Welcome to The Real Market with Chris Rising. I'm excited today to have the Chief Business Officer for View, which those of us who are starting to get back into the office full time, this is a podcast I want you all to listen to because Rahul Bammi, of the Chief Business Officer of View, is here. And we're going to talk about some really interesting things that are happening as it relates to technology and buildings, and specifically office buildings, but buildings in general. So, well, thanks for being here. I know it's really exciting that we finally got to do this, and it's really topic is really important in this new world we're in.
Thanks, Chris, and I'm pleasure to be here, and I love the podcast. I've heard quite a few of the episodes, so glad to be on it.
Well, that's terrific. Well, why don't you give two minutes on View and what it is you all do? I will start with, you've got some great clients and some companies out there that I really, really respect, from Kilroy to Alexandria. So why don't you explain what role View plays with those clients?
Sure. And Chris, we've actually evolved. So I'll take a couple of minutes. We've really now got two very distinct, kind of almost separate businesses. But I'll step back a little bit. View's originally Silicon Valley founded company, started in 2008. It got funded during the first round of the clean tech days as an energy saving solution, right? And a lot of the early folks came from the semiconductor industry or from solar or hard disk or some other version of the Valley that kind of was something related to semiconductors.
Yeah.
And at that point, really the thought was, how do we do something good for the world, but do it at scale? And even then we said real estate is the largest asset class in the world. And the thought really was, let's take something like a window, build in a semiconductor coating into it, and reduce both the energy footprint of the building, make the buildings more comfortable, and actually improve the experience people have. Mm-hmm. And so I like to explain it to people along the lines of, think about, we look at our computers and have computer chips and we put nanoscale semiconductors on them and so on. We're doing the same thing, but we're putting it on these massive windows, yes. Right? So you're putting it on big buildings. And that's where a lot of the challenge was. I'll describe the product a little bit, and then I'll talk about the company again. So product, we all know transition lenses. You go outside, they change with sunlight. They automatically get lighter and darker. Those are called photochromic because photons of light change the chromosome or the tint on them. What we do is very similar, but it's electrochromic, and we apply a current. So an easy way, like how I explain this to my mom, is to say, we make sunglasses for buildings. You take big buildings and you have these giant 10 feet tall sunglasses. That's basically what we're doing, right? Yep. Now it gives us some massive advantages because if it's electronic, you can control it. Like with your tinting sunglasses, when you go out, you don't. It depends on the sunlight, and they just change. We can control it. We can do whatever we like with it. And when we started this, it was purely an idea. At that point, the largest, we started with a piece of glass that was the size of a postage stamp. And it was literally about 3 years of R&D to get a technology, basically a chemistry and material science that actually worked and was reliable. And, coming from semiconductors with Moore's Law and so on, we were very conscious of the fact to say, we don't know a lot about real estate. Let's learn this and figure it out well. And we learned quickly, look, we need to make a reliable product. It better last 30 years. It should look good. It should be functionally the same. And then we had a semiconductor mindset that said, we want to make these like in the millions, not in the tens or thousands or hundreds. These need to be literally in the millions. That's the only way you transform an industry. So early on, we made a decision. We'll make a bulletproof, rock solid product. And then the second one was, we'll need to build this ourselves. We said, this is new to the world. So we did what Tesla did, which is, Tesla could very easily have said, I'll build a battery and license it to Mercedes and GM. And the reality is, I think we all know Mercedes and GM would have, no offense to them, probably screwed it up. Right? Mm-hmm. So said, okay, we'll be vertically integrated. So we built our own factory. We obviously made the semiconductor coatings, but we also said we're going to design the electronics and the network that goes with it. We're going to design the software and make it a complete end-to-end system.
Okay.
And so the nice thing is, you're in the Valley, people dream big and all the talent exists around us. So we hired electronics folks, we hired chip design or system designers, we got software folks and so on, and essentially built the full system. And then, the first version of the product we got out, it worked. It did what it was functionally supposed to do. It was fully integrated. We were proud of it. Kind of every window is essentially IP addressable individually. I have a network operations center about 50 feet from where I'm sitting, where 24/7, we know exactly how every view and window installed anywhere in the world is operating. We do software upgrades, just like Tesla does over the air software upgrades. We do that every couple of months. So we're like, we can make this a living, breathing, better, like completely a tech product. Like it's from a dead kind of static wall to like a smart living product. Now, like any startup, we went through our journeys. We made the first one. We realized we loved our product, like most people who make products do. Architects looked at it and said, yeah, I wish that looked slightly more neutral. I wish it was this, I wish it was that. So you kind of go through those cycles. The other cycle we went through early on was people just not knowing that you exist. Right?
Yeah.
So it was, and when I first came on board, I used to do this as a test. I'd go to a conference and I'd say, hey, how many of you know of Vue? And about 10, 15% of the hands would go up. This is in 2016. When I was doing that before the pandemic, about 80% of the hands would go up. So I'm like, okay, at least we got to that point. And then as we were going through that, we also said, we'll take a very engineering and science-based approach to this. So some of the first projects we did, and we actually we were lucky enough to do some big hospitals in Canada. We did some Kaiser Permanente facilities. We did Netflix's headquarters here in Los Gatos. And we keep hearing this from people saying, I just feel better in this building. And you'd see people saying, I feel calmer, I'm less stressed out, I like being here. And then it kind of hit us, we're humans, we all go for hikes on the weekends and so on because we like being in the sunlight, we like that natural light. And we said, how do we quantify this, right? The industry has not thought about this, right? It's like we pay a lot of attention, historically, real estate has paid a lot of attention to, should I put a pool? Should I put a gym in a building? Should I do other things? But
yes.
It's more qualitative when it comes to design features. We were all engineers. We said, let's go quantify this stuff. So as we step back, and some of our customers pushed us to do this. I remember talking in the early days to Google, and we've now done 5 buildings with Google. At that point, I remember Dave Ratcliffe telling me, we're a data-driven company. I believe it's true. It's a better environment, but prove it to me. Show me data, I need it for my engineers. So we actually worked with kind of academics from several universities. We said, you guys work with our customers and do some independent studies. And we were kind of blown away, even though we expected better results. They actually measured this in A/B studies where Netflix campus is a perfect example. There are 4 buildings. They're all connected by these sky bridges. 2 of them have Vue and 2 of them don't. And the buildings with Vue, people have fewer headaches. They have less eye strain. They actually say my productivity is higher. And when they asked engineers to rank all the amenities they listed 10 different things. We actually beat out free food. It was I want Vue because there are no blinds in our buildings and they have the outside view. And then, believe it or not, it was access to restrooms, how far they were from a restroom. And then it was free food. And then there was a whole bunch of other things. So we're okay, let's quantify this. So we did a lot of that. And what we found is really 3 things that resonate with people. One, the experience is way better.
Yeah.
And now we can finally quantify it and say the experience is better. The second was what we originally started with. The energy performance of the building is much better. And that's actually the easiest thing to prove. It's just physics, right? You keep heat out of the building, you have absorptive heat, you keep radiating heat out, you can measure it. It's easy to model, it's easy to prove out. We've done that. So those were like the first two we did. And then the third one, which we early on realized as we were putting all our windows in and kind of doing the networks and the fact that our windows need power and data, we had an early realization, and I remember talking about this even in 2016, saying, there has got to be a way to make buildings a lot smarter. And for us, it was a natural thing. I grew up, just to give a little bit of context, as a chemical engineer who switched to double E in grad school. And if you remember, no offense, you look old enough, similar to my age group, where you probably remember the Motorola StarTAC phones.
Oh, of course.
So that was my thesis work. I did process development of those. So,
wow.
We kind of saw the evolution of kind of the whole, first the internet and then the mobile industry and so on. And even then I remember saying, look, when I look at buildings, I use a phone every day. I drive to work every day. My phone's really smart. My car is somewhere in between. My building's pretty dumb. And as a user, it may not be true behind it, but I'm like, how do we make these buildings more like our phones?
Yes.
So that's where we actually stepped back and said, let's really look at these wires and so on we use and have a completely different vision of what a building can be. And so we started with that and said, this is, and for the context is important. Today, everybody talks about air quality and occupancy and so on. We were thinking of this 6 years ago to say, as I was going to construction sites, I saw this myself, and I'm looking at buildings and saying, okay, so there are 10 different sensors going into a building, and there are 10 sets of cables. That sounds pretty wasteful. Why can't these all sit on a common converged network? Why can't these all be cyber secure? Why can't they all actually talk to each other cleanly, right? And when I say talk to each other cleanly is people like you have all that data and information in usable forms, not just data sitting on servers somewhere, but in usable form that you can actually make
and ownable, monetizable form.
Exactly. And so we started this vision of how do we make buildings smart, and we've done that where all our buildings, when they get a glass, they actually get effectively a cyber secure converged network for free. It comes with the glass. And you see Google doing this in New York. They're actually running several other sensors on our network. So a lot fewer wiring, less labor, more secure, and data flows into a common data lake where they can make use of it and do all sorts of analytics.
And let's take a breath, because this is a lot, and it's really, I want to break it down a little bit.
Yep.
When I'm looking at your business model, is the majority of it ground up development, or do you also do adaptive reuse?
Great question. So historically it's been about 75% ground up development, 25% has been renovations. And we've historically done a lot of offices, obviously, and offices means both the corporate occupiers as well as developers. We've done airports, hospitals.
Were those renovations or were those ground up?
Both. We've done both. So, if I look at airports, we've done both existing terminals being renovated. So San Francisco, we did SFO Terminal 3. We're in the process of doing the next terminal. We did Terminal 1. We're in the process of doing 3. Logan, we did 3 terminals, all were renovations. DFW, we're doing multiple terminals renovations as well as new builds. So we do.
So how do you standardize the size of the windows, and then what do you do when someone is a renovation and it doesn't meet your standardization?
It's a great question. So that's one of the things that we're still working on today. And this was a discovery to me, and I was kind of blown away when I first came into real estate. Windows are actually not a standard size.
Yeah, I know.
And I was kind of shocked by this when I first saw this, right? Why? And then I discovered as we dug in deeper with designers and architects and stuff, there's no good reason. It's just
well, other than architects want to differentiate themselves and designers want to differentiate themselves.
See, and even that's okay. Like the intentional differentiation is fine.
Yeah.
But what we found very often was an architect will design a window that's 5 feet by 10 feet. And then you go down a wall and one window is 5 feet and the next one is 4 feet, 11 and a half inches. And the next one's 5 feet, 0.5, whatever. So we've tried to drive standard. So we can handle non-standard sizes. That's not an issue. It's not efficient from a manufacturing perspective. So we work with customers and, as we've gotten more well accepted, at this point we are installed in about 40 million square feet. We've got another 60 million that's been designed using Vue. So early on, we just did what customers asked. But then as customers have gotten to know us better, we worked with them to say, let's standardize them. It's simpler for you. It's simpler for me. It helps everybody. Let's do this. And they're generally willing. So,
and what is the cost differential just on a percentage basis for it to be the smart glass that you all produce versus if they went to some other manufacturer for double pane glass and all that kind of stuff?
So that's a great question. And, and the world changed about a month ago. And I'll explain why. So first I'll talk about what we lived through over the last few years is our glass, like the installed cost of the glass with smart glass, because as you know, the cost of the glass is not the biggest difference, it's the labor. So if you look at the installed cost with Vue, it was about 50% more expensive. So on a curtain wall. So sometimes it's 40%, sometimes it's 45, sometimes 50. I'm just using 50 kind of as a round number. And on a building basis, what that generally meant was it added about 1%, 1.5% to the construction cost of the building, because there were a few offsets. When you put glass in, there was no, we could reduce the HVAC size, for example, right? So things like that. But what changed about a month ago was the Inflation Reduction Act has now a 40% tax credit for using smart glass.
Wow.
So just like are you familiar with the solar tax credit?
Oh, very much so. Yep.
So it's the same thing, except that with solar, it was 30% and it had gone down to 26. And at this point, I'm not sure if it's 26 or 30. In our case, it's 40 because there's 30% for the glass and there's 10% for an American-made tax credit. Our factory is in just outside Memphis, so it's all US-made product. So there's a 40% tax credit.
Wow.
So today, it is exactly the same cost as regular, and it might even be cheaper in some cases, as double pane windows. So I think of it this way. This is, we've gotten a lot of inquiries in the last month. And maybe another way to put it is, we did about $75 million last year. This is when people were willing to pay a 50% premium on their curtain walls.
Wow.
Now that premium's gone. So it's become a complete no-brainer. And so it's brand new. It's, I guess the bill passed about 4 or 5 weeks ago. So we're part of it. It's, so this is a great time to kind of, and precisely.
Does that apply to both commercial and residential?
Everything. In fact,
so does this then make you say residential world may make sense, or does it keep you more focused on commercial?
We'll do both. So we are actually doing a lot of multifamily right now.
Oh, yeah.
And some of it is just, as you've seen what's happened with COVID and so on with offices. So there's a lot more multifamily being built. But I'd say in the past, before this, office, our value proposition was clearer. Residential, sometimes people struggle with cost, but people love the idea. Everybody I talked to as a customer in the last 5 years would say, oh, I wish I could have this at home. And so we're doing a lot of multifamily. We're not doing single family yet, but multifamily, we have, I think, somewhere around 40 or so multifamily towers that are in our queue in terms of backlog. So it's become a complete no-brainer. And, the tax credit, even the reason it got included, the DOE did a study and has basically said using smart glass or electrochromic glass is one of the best ways to basically to reduce the carbon footprint and energy of buildings. So
since that all passed, have the big boys started calling the Anderson windows and those kind of people? Because it sounds like you guys are in a very unique position.
Yes, we have some of those conversations going on. And then, your peer group. So if you look at some of the largest developers kind of in New York, in California, where they're making the decision for the whole building. And so from that perspective, we're also hearing a lot of existing customers who've used us in one project and we're on their second one, who've suddenly said, okay, now I have 6 projects. Actually, let me reserve capacity for my next 6 buildings. And the reality is we do expect to get, demand should go through the roof with this, and we're seeing that interest level. So, so we're getting a lot of interest from office. We've done a lot of life sciences.
Well, let's take it around the technology itself. So let's do a little dive into what we do a lot of surveys of our tenants, and one of the number one things coming out of COVID that we've seen is people want to know air quality. That seems to be a very clear thing, and with all the MERV filters and everything and all this stuff, the buildings are doing a good job of being able to provide people with that information. When you look at the information and all the data that you're ever able to bring through the windows, what would be the most relevant information for people who spend every day in a building?
So that's a great question. And, one of the things we actually did in 2019 or so was precisely this question. We were thinking about air quality even earlier. Mm-hmm. And even before COVID, there are some studies. There's actually a very famous study out of Harvard, which about 5-6 years ago, which says that as the level of carbon dioxide goes up, people's cognitive ability goes down. They start feeling, you hear people in a room saying, I'm feeling stuffy. That's usually because there's more CO2 in the room.
Yeah.
And so even at that point, what we did was, in addition to that, we designed our own sensors. So we have, we expanded beyond windows and actually designed these integrated sensor modules that measure CO2, air quality, humidity, temperature, occupancy, kind of all of the variables you'd normally measure. And the reason we made a single unit was we said, one, we want to make this much lower cost to install. You install like a module with 8 sensors instead of installing 8 separate things, and then collect the data. And then what we've also done is I've got a software team that's actually first we started with, let's take the data, let's give people that information. Then we went the next step and said, let's tie that with occupancy and let's make it better. So this was make the environment better. And when I say make the environment better, 2 ways. One is for people. The second is for building operations or energy usage. So the building I'm in, I've got these sensors all over. It's about a 60,000 square foot plate. We've collected about 3 billion data points this year. And what it's doing is at any given point, if occupancy is high somewhere, it increases the airflow.
Wow.
When occupancy is low, it'll actually reduce the airflow. It'll dim the lighting. It'll reduce the HVAC. It'll reduce the HVAC consumption. And it's essentially completely automating the process. Mm-hmm. And what we are seeing already is there's about a 20 to 25% energy reduction possible in buildings by automating all this with zero discomfort to people. And 2, on the experience front, exactly where you mentioned the air quality and so on, is we can not just measure it, but you can do something about it, and do something about it automated. Meaning, so you don't have to have somebody sitting there now saying, how should I respond to this? It's just completely automated. Mm-hmm. And we can dial down or up the level of automation that people feel comfortable with. So that's possible. So we are making the software products to do that, the kind of the analytics tools and the hardware. And then what we also did was we went a step further. So if you go to DFW Airport, for example, they've got these view sensors across 2 of their terminals. And we intentionally went with an airport to start because airports are much more like stringent. There's 50,000 people going through a terminal every day, right? Mm-hmm. So we said if they work in this environment, they'll work in any office building. And we did that. But then we heard this from our customers. So now what I've done is actually released software products that will work with my sensors or anybody else's sensors. I don't want you to get locked into an all-view solution because at the end of the day, I want to give you maximum flexibility. So what we've done on technology is we've built the plumbing, The plumbing comes with the windows. If you don't install our windows and you have an existing building and say, Rahul, I want to make my building better and I want to provide better air quality and data to my tenants, I can literally ship a box and make your existing network completely cyber secure, right? And it's a security product. In fact, we bought a company for cybersecurity, we built it into our product, so we could do that. And then I can actually provide you all the way from, you want sensors from us, we'll provide you the sensors and the software tools and the analytics, basically the analytical solutions, which there's an ESG module to reduce carbon and energy. There's an experience module to give more information to your tenants, to your property management, how is the space being used. And we are working on extending each one of those to go kind of the next step. We have a third one on building operations. So I have, as an example, I have a release product that, if you're familiar with RXR in New York.
Yes.
They are running in at about 25 million square feet, where this building performance product is actually giving them, it's a data lake. It's collecting data from their HVACs, BMS, every system, elevators, and so on. And it's telling them how to optimize maintenance frequencies, how to change filters and when to reduce that. They've actually reduced energy consumption. So one of the things we realized once you got beyond the dimming lighting in HVACs, there were buildings where there were periods in the afternoon where elevators were not being used.
Yeah.
So you don't need to have 3 elevator banks running. You can shut down 2 of them, never have longer than a 20-second wait time, but actually massively cut down the energy on that. And so you can start making much smarter decisions. And these are like machine learning's kind of discovering them for you.
Okay.
So that's like live and running there. You mentioned Kilroy and Alexandria earlier. Kilroy is using these same solutions. Kilroy has reduced their truck rolls by about 75% across the buildings because they can monitor their entire portfolio using our products. They know exactly how each building is running at any point. Is there any failure or on a system? They know it. And what they did was, to give you an idea of kind of the cybersecurity aspect, what the benefits of this are. Apart from the fact that you don't get hacked, which is becoming more worse and worse in this world.
Yes.
Is they're able to, earlier, if you wanted to have a firmware upgrade on your HVAC, whoever your HVAC supplier was sent in someone, they did an upgrade. The upgrade may have taken 30 minutes, but they billed you for a 4-hour service call or a 6-hour service call. We now do this where you give them a remote, fully kind of bulletproof tunnel, secure tunnel. It's running through our kind of secure tunnels over kind of a secure cloud. Somebody logs in. The entire exercise takes 15 minutes. Nobody comes on site. It's recorded. It's auditable. It's completely secure. Your truck roll went away.
Wow.
So Kilroy is doing that across their portfolio. Alexandria does that. RXR is doing it now. Tishman is actually in the process. They've rolled out and this is even without glass in all their existing portfolios. Tishman, I worked with Simon. We've done half his portfolio. He's doing the other half now. So we're seeing, but broadly, 3 big buckets of benefits there also. Kind of building operations, cybersecurity, tenant experience.
Yeah.
And
what's the UI for the building operations people? Is it a mobile app? Is it a web-based? What's that user experience?
All of the above. So we have a web-based if you want to do a lot of things at the same time. We have a tablet, we have a mobile app, and all 3 are available. And we've been and RXR has been a great testing ground for this. So you can have your engineering team and sit it and do it on the web-based thing, but then all their property managers have an app that they can pull up anytime on their phone and do what they need to. And we've elegantly kind of designed all the way from an app you can give to your tenants, to an app you can give to your property managers, to much more functionality for your own team, and within your own team, on any platform. And in fact, we've even gone further because I have a few customers who basically said, I have my own app, so I don't want another app, which I completely sympathize with. So in those cases, we have APIs and connectors And so we'll feed the data into, if you're using a tenant engagement app, sure, we'll feed in for tenant data, we'll put it there. If you've made your own in-house app for something else, we have APIs for it. And I've even set up a service marketplace where we've so far put about 12 companies into it. So there are other energy saving solutions and so on, where they all have connectors. And we are going to grow that to about 50 in the next 12 months.
So one of the interesting things I've read lately, especially after the federal legislation that you mentioned was passed and all, is there's starting to be some pushback from people who don't really understand what they're pushing back against. The state of Louisiana pension fund said they are going to reject using BlackRock because they don't believe in ESG, But all of it we can kind of chuckle at and all. But at the end of the day, I go back to the only reason we're all focused on this. Yes, there's a greater cause and all that. But at the end of the day, we want our buildings, whether office or apartment building, to be more efficient, and we want to lower our cost.
Yep.
So when you install, let's say, the full package of View, so the whole building, I think America Center 2 in San Jose has this, and we looked at underwriting. Yeah, so we looked very specifically. So I'm asking a leading question because I know the answer. But what do you think you can go back to someone and say, look, you may not like the politics of all this stuff, but you put in View and you use this technology, you're going to see X amount of reduction in your operating expenses. What are you seeing?
It's a great question. So I think I'd say, and there's a couple of answers, right? One is just the windows alone. If you're making a modern building today, on an annual basis, we'll save somewhere between 8 to 15% of your energy usage. And the reason I put a wide range is it depends what other things you're doing on the building. So if you use the absolute most expensive, best chiller possible, the savings may be on the lower end, but you will save somewhere around 10% plus minus on pure energy, right? That's one. The second one with windows is, and I realize this accrues to the tenants rather than you don't put any blinds up on the buildings.
Yeah.
That's generally, and in a good building, in a class A where you're putting motorized blinds and stuff, that's a pretty substantial cost.
Yes.
So how you negotiate the TI, it's money that's not being spent. So that's on the glass itself, you see that. And those energy savings will be every year. The other thing it actually does is, and more cities are doing this, whether we like it or not, your rates go up during peak periods. Rolling blackouts. We both live in California. We know what PG&E does, right? But we're providing the maximum energy savings at times of peak demand. So in those cases, we're reducing peak demand by about 20%, even on a new building.
Wow.
And so that's a real saving when it comes to it, right? So those are like very easily quantifiable. That's Windows. Then I'll go to the software products we talked about. So there, the building performance, and I was mentioning the energy there. We've done some studies. We're eating our own dog food and piloted this. Microsoft has done their own on similar solutions. They actually did one with Brookfield and I think in Manhattan West, I think that's the Brookfield headquarters and so on. We've got similar results that in a normally occupied building, and I'm not talking during COVID, I'm like normal operations, there's another 20 to 25% energy reduction possible with the building with just using the data intelligently and automating that.
It's amazing. It's
so
just, yeah.
To your point, regardless of your view on the climate, it's better, right?
We spent a lot of time and for a period of time had America Center 2 under contract, and we got very smart on that. And that's why I first got introduced to your products. But since that time, there's a lot more competition in the market. That you all deal with. And I do think what's unique about View is your manufacturing capability of the windows, not just selling the software. But where do you see this going? Do you think, especially if you're installing the windows, can the infrastructure in those windows be used for other things like antennas, and can View solve the frustration that we all feel when we're in a major city and we can't get cell phone connections because the towers can only do so much? But where do you see, I say it kiddingly, but where do you see View going in this world?
So that's a great question. That was exactly our intent when we started going down this path. We said, how do we make a building smart but also connected?
Yeah.
So today, in this building, in fact, I think you may not see. I don't know if you see the windows behind me. There's some glass.
A little bit.
You see a little bit of some video moving. These are transparent screens on the glass. That's one application kind of we're doing is you can use it for meetings, for Zoom and so on. But what we did do was we built in and the reason I pointed this out, every window we install, we've already future-proofed and put in enough capacity in the cables to carry high-definition video to every single window.
Wow. On the outside or the inside or?
Just on the inside. And the reason the bandwidth doesn't matter, the reason we put something like this on the outside is the UV would damage it.
Okay, so it's not a product yet that you could use to all of a sudden sell advertising from your buildings.
No, because those screens are outside. You're right. It's candidly not cost effective for that today. On the inside, you can. So these are like organic LED screens. We are very, very careful about reliability. So the reason we put them on the inside is our windows are blocking all the UV.
Okay.
But to your point, we are putting in the building infrastructure today. We put a fiber in the vertical riser, and we use coax that goes across the horizontal plane. So horizontally in building, we can carry 10 gig per second data to across the plane. On the vertical riser, just to give you an idea, we're putting in over 90 strands of fiber. We are using 3 today.
Wow.
So the other 93, and the reason we designed it that way is similar to how people laid cables under the fiber in the ocean, was we're going to do the work anyway now. Let me future-proof it for the next 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
But it's much more expensive for you to decide 6 years from now, hey, let me go install fiber in the whole building now, right? Yeah. So we're like, let's do it when you're doing this right now. And so one of the things we did, even to your point on signals, I have a full team that came out of places like Qualcomm and so on, where we've already designed the solution you talked about. So it's a CBRS-based neutral host. So my phone here, I have an eSIM which shows a view network. Yes. So I have enhanced 5G inside this building coming from my windows. And wow. And there's if I zoom out, I'll show you in a bit, there's a green LED you'll see. There's actually a 5G antenna in there.
Wow.
Now, where we are today, why that's not commercial, to give you an idea, it can do data today. For voice, we are working with the carriers because you have to go through the certifications. Yeah. And carrier certifications are not quick. They take their time. And so we're in that process. But yeah, it's completely, not only is it possible, we've already designed the solution. We're prototyping it. I use it for data inside the building.
Unbelievable. So you're not needing to, you're able to actually use 5G technology to get that data. Yes. You're not going through a Wi-Fi broadband system.
Yep. So I have
you're actually getting what everybody promised about 5G that most of us don't get.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Because we don't have
and with 5G, this is like a little bit of the dirty little secret with 5G is, especially with millimeter wave, which is what Verizon and AT&T do. The reason those ads are primarily around stadiums and so on, they work great when you have line of sight.
Yeah.
The moment you have a solid surface in between, whether it's drywall or glass, or it doesn't matter, millimeter waves don't go through that. This is physics. There's no rocket science in it. So the fastest 5G will not penetrate buildings.
Yep.
And which is why they're using some hybrid schemes of, in stadiums, I'll use this and I'll use a different frequency band here. So we basically solved that. And
that's amazing.
So it's running today.
That's amazing. That's amazing. We've talked a lot about the great products and the great services that you guys provide. Let's talk a little bit about the history of the company and how you got involved in it. Was this started as one of your traditional bootstrapped, hoping we can make it in the Silicon Valley, or did it come out with some big backing? How did it all start?
No, it's the former. It started with, in fact, I think early on the original founder is not here, but it originally started with some bootstrap. I think it got funded by Vinod Khosla, so Khosla Ventures, and I believe it was Sigma. It might have been a different venture fund, but it was during the clean tech days, and they were funding solar companies. They also funded this, saying this is one way to reduce energy in real estate. And it was literally that, saying portfolio approach, like typical venture capital. Some of these will work and others won't.
Yeah.
And and then our current CEO Rao got involved about a year later, and he essentially got a lot of the talent in, kind of did all the R&D, then had the vision of building a factory. And kind of went down that path. I got involved in this candidly. I spent about the first 15 years of my career in the semiconductor industry. So I grew up as an engineer and R&D person, went to business school, then got on the product side, and then was a GM. I was running several businesses. And then about 2011, I said at that point, I wanted to leave semiconductors. I went into the LED chip industry. And I was in the leadership team of a company that spun out of HP. That was about $500 million in revenue, so decent size. We grew that business to about $1.5 billion in about 3.5 years. So massive growth, just as LEDs is going. And then we took it through a sale. So we took it to a private equity group. We sold it in literally towards the end of 2015, early 16. So as I was closing the transaction, I was like, I'm in the Valley. I have the entrepreneurial bug. I want to go do something. And I actually reached out to a friend of mine saying, hey, I want to go do something in healthcare. And I'm like, I know nothing about healthcare. And so he said, why healthcare? I'm like, well, it's big enough. It's screwed up enough that I'm sure there's something I can fix there.
Yeah.
He introduced me to View, and he was actually at a board. And he said, look, it's a phenomenal technology company. I'm on the board, but you can be like the right-hand guy and run the business side of things with the CEO. It'd be a great partnership. So that's basically how I got there. Wow. And I actually told him the same thing. I said, I know nothing about real estate either. He's like, yeah, you'll figure it out. He's like, this is tech, you'll figure it out. Okay. Yep. So that's basically how I got into this.
That's a good story. So how do we're both experiencing something that I don't think we ever thought possible, but there is this great resistance for people to come back to office buildings and come back and collaborate. It's really big up in the Valley there. It's big here in Los Angeles. We're starting to see some fractures of that. I think the threats to Netflix's business and Hulu and some of these, people are realizing it's maybe better if I'm there. But what kind of role do you see View playing in attracting people back to the office? And are you seeing any examples of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I discuss this with pretty much every customer I talk to, and even and I see really two things. So one is maybe a fundamental. I think we should all acknowledge that the world did change with COVID, and we did all discover that it is possible to be productive remotely. Now, having said that, I think it's not binary. People sometimes make this out to be a black and white debate, and I'm like, look, you can actually come into work 4 days a week, and the one day where you really need quiet time, you could be at home and do it remotely. But at the end of the day, I hear this from every CEO on the corporate side. I see it myself in our own company, which is if you want to build culture, you need to do it in person. If you want to actually have meaningful product discussions, I cannot walk up to, Zoom has whiteboards. It sucks. You need to do it on in person, right? You can debate stuff.
Yeah.
And especially with people who are earlier in their career, they need to get mentored. That's how you learn stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's in person. So I think that will, it's a little slow, but it will happen over the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. It will happen. I think what we need to do is, and this is what the council, it's an opinion. What I tell most of my customers is, look, we need to reimagine our spaces and make them better for younger folks and make it more desirable so they have reasons to come in.
Yeah.
And part of that is make the spaces more inviting, make them more collaborative. Get rid of cubicles. Thankfully, cubicles were going away already, but kind of, reconfigure the spaces. And part of this is if you can make the environment nicer than it is, frankly, at home, people will have more of a reason to come in.
Yep.
So from a glass perspective, I think it's every View building I go into, and I'm of course biased, the fact that you have more light and so on, the atmosphere is just completely different.
Well, the one thing we haven't talked about is how you combine the light coming in with the lighting system in the space. So the circadian rhythm going. I mean, the time I spent in that development of American Center too, you don't know exactly what's going on, what's different, but you're like, this just feels different, and in a good way.
Yes.
And when you really get the sense of how the lighting in the space works with the light that comes through, the sunlight that comes through, and as it moves from in the morning into the evening, it's an unbelievable experience that most people will never be able to replicate in their home. So,
exactly. And this is exactly what you said. We actually have struggled with this, saying the product's almost too good. As you said, people realize it's better, but they don't know why. So one of the things we're doing is educating folks. But what we've done is we saw this in places, and even, people are open to education. So we did this with a few of our customers where their HR teams and so on actually shared data on exactly this to say, look, we invested in this product to make your environment better. Here's why it's better for your health. Here's why it's better for your moods. Here's why it's better for your sleep. It's yet one other thing we did. And I've seen when people realize that, they're like, oh, I never knew that. And then the next reaction is, yeah, that makes sense. So it naturally resonates. So one, and I'm seeing this from folks also to say, okay, how do I make that environment better? So we're doing that not just with new construction, but even with renovations. We've done a few 500,000 square foot renovations in New York City. We've done like 3 in the last year and a half or so, and there's more coming. And everybody raves about them post renovation. So,
well, let's talk about that a little, because I think it's very key to. I tell you, it's key to our business, because we at this point would much rather acquire things that exist and then and renovate them than we would do ground up because of the debt markets and such. How difficult is it to take a building, an 80s or 90s built office building, and replace all the exterior windows with View product?
It's the same as if you were going to replace the facade anyway. No issues at all. In fact, I'll point out the ones we did in New York. I think one is a 1969 building. One is like a early 70s. We did TIA's headquarters. It's a 72, 73 vintage.
Yeah, it's a wonderful building. Yeah, I've been to it.
Yeah, it's a 3rd Avenue. And it's the same as anything else. No, nothing out of the ordinary. Like the only difference in our glass versus the others is when somebody installs it, they put one small hole in the IGU because there's a cable coming out. And that cable goes up, and that's what it ties into a network controller. That's what gives it the intelligence. It's data and power.
But is it all internal to the window, or what happens if you're actually replacing a window and then there's cement or there's block and then there's another window? Does the cord show on the inside and you have to drywall it?
We've got all the different framing systems, everything all figured out. So it's easy. From your perspective, if you decide you're going to do a skin upgrade, it's the same, no difference.
And what about?
And it doesn't take any extra time or anything. It's the same schedule, same time. Now the same cost with the tax credit. So there's in fact, even on day one, I'll say if you do it, you'll basically save money because the cost is the same. You'll get rid of the blinds.
Yep.
You'll use less energy. Day one. So it's even just on a spreadsheet, it's a no-brainer.
It all makes sense to me. Let me ask you this though: what about, as someone who acquires buildings like that may have this? What about warranties, and are they transferable?
Yeah.
What do you do with all that stuff? Yeah.
They just transfer over.
And what's a typical warranty on some of this stuff?
We do the same as regular glass. It's 10 years. Yeah. So we do the same 10 years. And I discovered this, by the way. The reason it's 10 years for everybody is the seals that Dow sells have a 10-year warranty. So they actually last about 35 years or something.
Yeah.
But Dow will not